So let's get the show on the road. This is Indie Dev Reality Check, the good, the bad, and the ugly of being an indie dev in 2025. I'm going to be covering a pretty wide range of things here, and it's, as I mentioned, a bit of a bird's eye view, a bit of a general talk about just the challenges of being an indie dev in this decade, basically. Let me start with a little bit about myself. So my personal indie journey began roughly in 2013. I actually joined Georgia Tech thinking I wanted to be a filmmaker at the time, and then I joined VGDev, which if you don't know is a game development club here at Georgia Tech, and was immediately just like overwhelmingly falling in love with making games with this community here at Georgia Tech, and that is roughly when I was like, you know what? I think I know what I want to do with the rest of my life. I just want to keep doing this. I just want to keep making games. From there, while I was still at Tech, I started working in the QA department at Kartik Kini. That was a co-op where you got to take a semester off to do full-time work and then come back to do class and then go back to full-time again, which is why I graduated in 4 years and not 3. Or that's not quite right. Anyways, doesn't matter. I think I got my graduation time wrong. In 2016, I went to SCAD Atlanta for the Global Game Jam there, which is where I met my current Finite Reflection team for the first time. And we met and made a game during that game jam, which ended up winning Best in Georgia, and that was kind of our impetus for starting a studio together. And then in 2017, maybe 2018, I maybe got that date wrong, I graduated from Georgia Tech with a bachelor's in computational media, which is, again, half liberal arts, half computer science degree here at Georgia Tech. And then also, right after I graduated, I started as a producer at Cartoon Network, going from QA into production, which is, for those of you who are unaware, project management, basically, in a nutshell. The job entails basically taking projects from ideation to completion, but you're doing less of the actual coding and the art yourself, and you're doing more of just the overseeing of things and making sure that things don't go off the rails. And then in roughly 2018, 2019, we transitioned the Unity user group of Atlanta to be called ATL Game Devs, and I became the lead organizer of that. If you're interested in joining, there's a banner downstairs in the exhibition hall. You can scan a QR code there. And then in 2020, I joined a company called Tastyfill, which I'm not entirely sure if it still exists here in Georgia, but it is a hyper-casual mobile game studio where I was a senior Unity developer helping develop those games that you see ads for where the ads don't always match the game. I was developing those, like, guy runs down a hallway and, like, gets hit by silly obstacles type games. And learned a lot during my time there. We were just developing games on a breakneck pace. I think in the year and a half that I was at that company, I helped release, or finish, I should say. I wasn't responsible for releasing. I helped finish like 10, 15 games in just that short span of time. And then from there, around COVID era, when COVID started, I switched career again a little bit back into being project management, where I was a producer for a website called the Puzzle Society. And then in 2023, our game that we were developing at the time, Void Souls, got a publisher, and I went full-time indie and have been since. So before we can really get into talking about the indie reality, we have to actually define an indie. Everyone has slightly different opinions on what is an indie developer. Whenever there are award shows, they're always like, yeah, this game's an indie, it gets an indie award. Everyone's got a little bit of a different opinion, so for the purpose of this talk, I'm going to identify what an indie is. This is not the definition of indie. So the definition, as I'm talking about it here for this talk, and as it matters for what I'm talking about here, an indie is basically defined as being on this spectrum from hobbyist to AAA, where on the left side of the screen here, you have hobbyists who have no need for a profit motive. Obviously, a hobbyist project can make money, but by my definition for this talk, if you're a hobbyist, you don't need to make a profit off your project. You're doing it because it's a hobby. It's fun. And then on the way other end of the scale, you've got the AAA, maybe some people call it now quadruple A studios, where a massive profit is simply necessary for them to succeed. And this spectrum, where you fall on it, has a big impact on how you approach making your game. If you are putting in a AAA level of investment in your game, Unfortunately, you can't be making a visual novel. Those just don't sell at that same scale that they need to for them to recoup all the costs that they're spending there. And then in the middle, there's this big gray area of indie dev, triple I is a term I'm here recently, where it's like high budget indie dev, then double A, which is on the lower end of triple A. There's a whole big messy space here, but indie devs are generally going to be needing some profit motive. And this is important here about why I'm talking about this, is that you are trying to make money here, and that is a defining part of how you approach making games. So how do indies make games? There's a lot of different ways that indies go through making games. The most common one that everyone always talks about is D2C, direct to consumer, or as direct as you can be in this day and age, because you have to go through a platform. You can't really, as an indie, just approach Walmart and hand them a DVD and say, can you sell this for me? So you do it through a platform, which is going to be Steam, which is going to be your console platforms. It can even be itch. People do make careers off of selling games on itch as well. Sometimes indies will go the Kickstarter/Patreon route to help supplement their income, but at the end of the day, that still usually funnels right back into direct-to-consumer selling your units to people who want to buy and play your game. Another common way that a lot of indies make money is through indie games on mobile stores, and that's through ads and in-app purchases. And then the most, in my opinion, least talked about part of being an indie that is honestly one of the most stable ways to make money, in this day and age especially, is B2B, business to business, where you as a studio or you as a solo indie dev are a subcontractor or co-developing a game with another indie studio, or even with a AA or AAA studio. Sometimes these bigger studios will look for smaller teams to just fully handle a small part of their game and subcontract out you to do that. There's also work for hire. When I was working at Cartoon Network, that was a lot of the stuff that we did there, where we would just straight up pay developers to say, hey, we need a new Steven Universe game. Can you guys make this for us? And here's how much we're going to pay you. That comes with its own strings, of course, because you're no longer developing your own game. You have to follow the creative direction of someone else. You have a lot more hoops to jump through. Then there's porting. This is something that my studio also does. We help port other indie games to other platforms, and this is something that you have to develop a skill set for. You have to buy a lot of tools for. So it has a lot of upfront costs and labor, but then has a benefit of not only being able to help other indies get their games onto other platforms, but it also is another way to supplement your income. And lastly, you've got tools and consulting, where basically you are either just making tools that help other people make their games easier, or you're just consulting, which is another thing that I do for my studio, where you're on a lot of different teams as a consulting person, where you're just there to make sure that people don't go off the rails, make sure that they don't make the same mistakes that you've made in your career. Usually consulting doesn't come at the beginning of an indie dev's career. That usually comes a little bit later on, once you have the experience to prove that you can actually consult on something. But this is just kind of a very broad overview of the various ways that indies can make money. Publishing as well falls under either D2C or B2B, depending on how you approach your publishing model. Either you are a publisher, an indie publisher yourself, or you are making money by getting your games published and having your publisher pay you to develop your games as well. This is the indie timeline as it pertains to me and my journey, and as it pertains to the current indie industry. I'm not suggesting that indies didn't exist before this date. There was a very different kind of indie industry there, but the current indie game dev mentality and the current indie dev industry really started with the Flash era of games, which you can see here on this graph of Flash games released peaked in around 2010, 2011. And these were, for those of you who may not know, just like web-only games, and they were, for their time, incredibly easy to make, very quick and simple to set up and just upload something to addictinggames.com, miniclip, what have you, and have your game be played by thousands upon thousands of people. And usually your only source of income there was either someone licensing your game or ads. And then came Steam Greenlight era, which was a whole new era of indie dev. This is technically where I started my professional indie dev career, was during the Steam Greenlight era. It's kind of interesting to note here how the birth of Steam Greenlight coincides with the decline of Flash. I was trying to look up information to see how much that was actually a correlation or a direct causation, but the correlation's definitely there. This was the beginning of Steam starting to open the doors to people. Prior to this date, it was just, do you know someone at Steam? Have you like have you met Gabe? Can you like directly tell him, please put my game on your platform? But then they did this, and they put the power into the hands of the fans to say, hey, what games do you want to buy on Steam? And that was, at the time, revolutionary. No one had really done that before with a whole store platform. And that's immediately what caused a massive rise in games being released over time, which then brought us to the current, more or less, era of Steam, which is the Steam Direct Fee / Unity era. Once again, a fun kind of coincidental thing where Steam Direct happened and Unity just started popping off. Like, they became really the bread and butter of a lot of indie games to start using to publish their games on Steam. And you can see the immediate effect that it had on the games that are being released on Steam. Hopefully, hopefully not. We're not leading into an AI slop era. Hopefully that's, if it happens, it's short-lived, but we'll see. So now that we've gone over a little bit of a history of just the indie timeline, what is an indie, where indies are going, what is the 2025 indie reality? What is it that we're really here to talk about? It may be the indie apocalypse. Maybe. AKA, we're going to talk about market saturation for a second. Because this is something that affects every indie that is trying to release a game today because of the aforementioned Steam Direct Fee era that we're in right now. Again, the amount of games that have been releasing on Steam year over year since Steam Direct is just staggering. In 2024, 18,000 games in a year, out of 365 days. That's, I could have done the math, I didn't do the math, but that's a lot of games a day to be releasing on a platform. And it is a very heavily saturated market. Because of that, the average indie's income is not great. This is from 2020, so the data is a little bit dated, but I'm going to hazard a guess that the data hasn't gotten any better since 2020, judging again by the previous graph of how far the market has saturated since. Just consider like how little $4,000 is when you consider the average dev cycle of a game. You're not finishing your game in, on average, less than a year, especially if it's your dream project. And there are a lot of dream project games that take 2 years to make and then make $4,000 or less. That's not a livable income if you're, again, an indie trying to survive off of this as your source of income. However, if you've been online at all with the indie scene, if you've been on r/gamedev, you've probably heard a lot of this before. And I think a lot of people do talk about this a bit too much. So I kind of wanted to give a bit more of a nuanced take on what I believe is the reality of the indie apocalypse. And a lot of this, again, is backed up with some data and personal experience. I don't believe that the indie apocalypse is as apocalyptic as people make it out to be. There is market saturation, but there's more to the story. There was this part of the graph on the previous one that I showed where a big chunk of this is showing up as darkened, and it's saying limited games. This is something that Steam started implementing in 2018, where they started to recognize that there are a lot of games that are people's first games. There are a lot of games that are just, hey, I just learned how to use Unity, and I made Flappy Bird, and I put it up on Steam. And prior to that date, Steam's algorithm was treating that exactly the same as every other game on the platform. And they were just saying, yeah, let the algorithm figure it all out. And so starting 2018, it started to like find a way to make the games that are trying to make money versus the games that are hobbyists versus the games that are, unfortunately, asset flips or, you know, maybe less than good intended games on the platform to help differentiate them a little bit better. And if you look at Steam games released by year and look at their review counts and filter out everything that's less than 50, yes, there are still a great deal more indie games being released by year. But the difference goes from, on the previous graph, 400 to 18,000 to now roughly 400 to 4,000, 5,000. It's still a big jump, but it's not, again, not nearly as apocalyptic as people like to make it out to be. When you look at games, because again, if you have released an indie game and your intent is to make money off of it, hopefully you've done enough marketing to reach 50 fans. who will leave a review. That should be a baseline for you to know that at least 50 people are going to play my game and leave a review. I have released many games that haven't done that, and that kind of goes to show how difficult it is to market your game on these platforms. But when you compare against games that are only in this latter bucket of 50 plus reviews, you see just not how intense of an apocalyptic scale you're competing with. Also, there's just so many gamers today. This is just Steam that we're looking at right here. And this isn't even, I was trying to find data of like, I don't know how many people are on Steam, how many total unique users are on Steam in a week or a month. But that's just like, I took a screenshot at random, and at that time, there was 25 million people on Steam at that time. And you may think, oh, maybe they're all playing like the one or two small, like same games. They're all playing COD, they're all playing CSGO. But CSGO's all-time peak is not even 2 million, which, again, when you look at 25 million that just happened to be online at that time, 41 million was a peak 30 days ago, apparently. The scale is staggering. The number of players that are out there that want to play something interesting that aligns with their interests, your audience does exist. It is not, again, the point of all this is, it is not as apocalyptic as people make it out to seem. And all this data, a lot of this data that I've been talking through, by the way, is fully available on SteamDB, which I highly recommend checking out if you haven't and you're at all curious about the analytics of, or the realism of the analytics of releasing a game on Steam. And then lastly, my last point about kind of indie apocalypse, whether or not it is truly a real thing or not, is that a lot of times people release one game and decide that this is impossible. This is also a little bit dated information, but it comes from Chris Zukowski's blog, who does a lot of really good data-driven analysis of the Steam market. I mean, the jump of games released by studio from 1 to 2 is incredible. 38,000 at the time of when Chris Zukowski did this poll, 38,000 studios just did one game and they were like, I can't compete with this, it's too much. And then down to 8,000 decided, let's try one more, let's try to keep it going. And then you can see how the graph continues to go kind of asymptotically down. I think this is a really important graph for people to remember. Like, how many things in life can you nail on your first try? You're not going to paint something and have that be the first thing that gets sold to an art collector. You paint and paint and paint and paint and paint and paint, and then maybe one day you make something that you're so proud of, that other people are proud of, that other people want to buy. Same goes for games. Same goes for almost any creative endeavor, right? But for some reason in games, it doesn't apply. As you can see, a lot of people just do one and done. They're like, I'm good, I can't do this. And that's fine if it truly isn't what you want to do. I think the issue comes when people look at this, or when they look at all the other data and they say, it's just impossible. It's just too many games out there. It's too saturated. I can't compete with any of it. So all this leads me to a very complicated answer to the good and the bad and the good and the bad. So we're going to go over a little bit of both, column A, column B. Yes, there are a lot of products in the market. It is competitive. That's a fact. No one's denying that. However, a lot of them are hobbyist / first-time games / asset flips / things that you're not competing with. This is not to say that the fact that there are a lot of hobbyist projects is a good thing because they're bad. It's more so that it's a good thing because you, as an indie trying to make money, are not competing with those. That being said, because of the quantity of games out there, including hobbyist games, the quality bar for indie games has never been higher. Imagine, like, the average gamer, if they sit down to play your game and they just encounter like 2 or 3 bugs in the opening minutes of your game, what reason do they have to keep playing your game when there's so many more games that they can play, so many more that are free, so much more other stuff that they could be doing with their time? You do have to work a good deal harder to make sure that your quality bar is on par or better than everything else that's out there on the market, because the moment that a gamer sees that it's not, why should they stick around and try your game over anything else out there? That being said, there are a lot of gamers, right? I just said this case about, like, yeah, they could go jump something else, but also the neat thing about indie games is that they're an art form, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Someone's going to look at what you're making and say, this is for me. This means a lot to me, and I'm going to play this despite its flaws. And that's honestly one of my favorite things about making games in the indie space, is that you are usually making something that means a lot to you, and it's almost impossible that it's not going to mean something to someone else as well. If you're a 1 in a million individual, and you're so unique that you're 1 in a million, there's still millions of people out there like you, because the world is just that big. Platforms, unfortunately, favor big hits. The way that the algorithm works and the way that the algorithm kind of floats up games when people browse these platforms, unfortunately, they do skew heavily towards things that are big hits and will prefer to market something that's making more money than market something that's a niche interest thing. However, thanks to things like Discord and social media followings, niche communities have actually never been stronger. It is so much easier for you to take your niche interest game that you're trying to reach out to people with and start a Discord, start a focused Instagram account or what have you, and market your game specifically to the people that you're trying to reach, and actually reach them. Just imagine, again, when I started in indie game development, there was no Discord. There was no way for me to say, here's the thing that I'm making. Who wants to play this? At the time, all it was Twitter. And I would just post Screenshot Saturday hashtags of the screenshots of what we're working on, and hope that amongst all the games that are doing Screenshot Saturdays, that someone who likes what I'm making sees what I want, sees this, right? Thankfully now there are tools to actually help you find who it is that you're trying to get to. And it is important that you do so, otherwise no one's going to get to it. So this is just, again, a bird's eye view of the good and the bad and the good and the bad. There's a lot of it out there. Let's talk about the ugly, the reality. And again, my reality. A lot of this is going to be super subjective. I mean, everything I've said up until this far is data that I handpicked because of my experiences. So it's going to come with a pretty heavy caveat/lean. I'm sure someone else who's experienced a very different side of the indie reality will have a very different opinion about all this. But now we're getting really into my experience. Oh, my transition failed on this one. That's okay. So I want to kind of talk through the games that we released in chronological order. The very, very first game that I released on Steam was a game called Containment, which was released in 2018. We only worked on this game for about 6 months, and bam, that's how much money I made. What were the learnings from all this? Containment, again, it was released in 2018, so this was our very, very first Steam page that we ever put live. Had no idea what the heck we were doing. That's going to hurt you a little bit. Another thing that we learned at this time is that minimalism is a very hard sell. A lot of Steam shoppers look at a game that is minimalist and assume that it is low effort. Because they see, oh, well, it's just like hexagons. I can do a hexagon. In the same way that someone goes to an art museum and sees like a red square on a painting on a wall, and they're like, I could do that. That's easy. And because of that, that does affect a little bit of how people perceive your game. This was also a very small, cheap game, but we sold this for $2 on Steam because, again, it was our first game. Didn't know what we were doing. We were just like, maybe if we sell it for $2, a lot more people will buy it. Turns out the reverse is actually true. Sometimes the cheaper your game, the more people are like, why is it so cheap? Is there something wrong with it? Do the devs not have confidence in it? Why would they sell this for only $2? And lastly, we just had no marketing buildup. Because again, it's our first game. Didn't know what we were doing. We were just like, oh, I guess this is how you do it. You just like put up the Steam page and then you press launch, right? That's how you sell a game. Spoiler alert, it is not. Then we released Twin Cop. Interestingly, we started development of Twin Cop before we released Containment. We worked on this for like a year and got a little burnt out, and we were getting very confused about what we were doing here. And so then we switched gears to release that, then returned to this and released this. So technically, this is the first game we started. This is the first game we released. This is the second game we released. In total, we worked 2 years on it, and in total, to this date, it's earned just shy of $9,000. What were the learnings from this? Couch co-op only. We thought this was a cool selling point. And to be fair, every conference that we went to, and we took this to a lot of conferences, we took this to like 4 DreamHacks, we took it to PAX West, we took it to GDC, we took it to a lot of places, and everywhere we took it, when people sat down with the controllers and they were playing it with their friends, they were like, whoa, like this is really fun, I'm having a great time. And we're like, that's exactly what will happen when we launch on Steam. We'll launch it, and everybody will invite their friends over, they'll have big parties, and they'll all be playing Twin Cop. Again, $9,000 for a game that costs, how much did it cost? $10? $14? I can't remember. Still, you know, really not that much money when you consider it was 2 years of development with a team of 4. That's not a livable, sustainable amount, right? So the couch co-op only definitely hurt us, because again, you need to have a friend literally in the room with you to buy and to play this game. So a lot of people were like, well, I don't feel like inviting a friend over, or they're saying, I don't know if this is worth the money because I don't have a friend sitting next to me right now that I'm going to like play this with. So that's what happened. Because of that as well, it had kind of an unclear audience, which is something we'll talk a little bit more about later, about how you kind of overcome these challenges. Couch co-op is a feature, not an audience, is one of the things we learned in this. It is something that games have, but it is not the identity of a game. There isn't an couch co-op audience because couch co-op applies to so many games. Like Halo has couch co-op, and does Fall Guys have couch co-op? I don't know. But there's a spectrum there, right? You can play maybe Goose Game. Untitled Goose Game is a better example. Halo to Untitled Goose Game are both couch co-op games. But you can imagine how their audiences are vastly different from one another. So who are you marketing this to then? And again, we're still learning marketing. This is technically the first game we ever started. We're still learning how do we say, here's the game we're making, do you want to play it, and then have them follow through on that. And then after that, we released a game called The Garden and the Wildvines. This game development began right at the start of COVID, basically, and released in 2021. We only spent a year on it, and as you can see, it made between the revenues of these two in the middle there somewhere. We were really hoping, like, oh, this is game number 3. Surely we got this. We know what we're doing now. We know who our audience is. Our audience is people who like platformers. I had also just played Celeste, and like everyone else in the world was like, this game is amazing, and wanted to make my own queer platformer game about my experiences in life. And a lot of heart and soul went into this. And after we released it, I started finally reading a lot more blogs on marketing and realized the platformer genre itself is just one of the most saturated markets of the indie market. If we're talking about a saturated indie space, a big chunk of that is platformers, because it is also one of the older genres in gaming in general. It is what most tutorials will teach you how to build in Unity, and therefore a lot of indies take their tutorial projects and then end up releasing them. And now when you're a Steam shopper and you're browsing Steam, you're like, there's another platformer, there's another platformer. To stand out in the space, your platformer has to make as big of an interesting splash as the big ones in there, because there's just so many out there. And I want to be honest, this isn't as good as Celeste. I said it. I'll also say, honestly, this was a bit of a filler project. This is something we also learned during development, which was we were a little burnt out from this one, and again, COVID was happening. A lot of stuff was happening. We were all a little bit stressed on a lot of levels, and needed to just keep velocity. We needed to just keep releasing games, because we didn't want to stop and like spend a whole year to not learn anything. So this was a little bit short, both in development time and in terms of marketing. And last but not least, of course, still learning marketing. 3 games in, since 2016 to 2021, like 6 years in, we're still learning the basics of marketing. So what was the result of all this? Well, $15K minus the Steam cut, which again is 30%, minus taxes over 4 years, $2,000 a year for a team of 4. Again, not sustainable. So how did we survive? Don't quit the day job. This was the way that we were able to keep making games this entire time, was by having day jobs and doing everything that we just did on the side and hoping for the best. This is the ugliest side of my indie dev career. Following all these learnings and all these experiences, I started prototyping this game. This is like the splash screen for like the earliest prototype that I made of this. This was inspired by, I had just played Elden Ring. Again, I was burnt out on Garden of the Wildvines because I'm now 6 years into my career and I have yet to figure out how to pay rent with this thing that I've decided that I'm spending the rest of my life doing. So I was just like, what am I doing wrong? I need to like go back to the drawing board. I'm just gonna plop down a triangle on the middle of the screen and make 2D Elden Ring. I don't like, as simplified Elden Ring as I can possibly make, because that's a game that I'm just like super inspired by right now. I'm just gonna start making that. I was not thinking about marketing. I was not thinking about audience. I just wanted to make something that I liked, that I was proud of, and could put out for free. And we did. We made this early prototype of the game with like this very dark and hard to see aesthetic and just like my really badly photoshopped textures, and released it on Steam for free because we were just like, maybe this is all a wash. Maybe we don't know what we're doing. We should just like put something out for free, and maybe this will be the last thing we release. And we made some Steam forum posts after like some people found this, and they were like, oh, there's like kind of something here maybe. And so we were like, okay, for you guys who kind of like this, we'll release some updates, but you know, it is what it is. You guys enjoy it, it'll be fine. No one's gonna play this. And then Iron Pineapple played it. And you can see, I mean, it's 3 million views now, but a lot of those views happened very quickly early on in when this video was posted. This video alone, this one video here, has changed my entire career. The influx of players was just unprecedented for us. We got a publisher to cold call us and just straight up be like, hey, how much money do you want to finish this game? Okay, here's a brand new experience that I have to figure out what to do with. And now we're sitting here with a freely released Steam game and a publisher being like, wait, you already released this on Steam? What are you doing? You had gold in your hands and you just threw it out for free. What are you doing? And we were like, we didn't know. we did 3 games in a row and we're struggling financially. We just put it out there. How are we supposed to know this was the one that everyone wanted to play? And we ended up signing with that publisher that cold called us, and 2 years later, released it on Steam to markedly more success than any of our previous games. Because this was with a publisher, I can't just tell you how much money that was, but it is what has been funding development of our next game as well. And what did we learn from all this, right? The main lesson here that I feel like I learned working on this game and my experience of this game coming out is 2 words: inherent marketability. If you're trying to make an indie game and you're trying to sell an indie game and have it sell enough that you can pay rent with your indie game, it's gotta have inherent marketability. And what I mean by that is you put up a screenshot or a description of the game, you just tell someone the elevator pitch and someone's ready to hand you money right now to buy it. You don't have to say, no, you don't understand. Let me explain like this part of it. You don't understand, the story is like this. Or let me explain to you what it means to me. No. It needs to mean something to them at first glance. And this is something that like AAA has been doing forever. Is the reason why there was that trend for a while, I don't remember this, but there was that trend where like every free-to-play like war game on your phone just had an angry man yelling, if you guys remember that. But like these trends exist for a reason, because some marketing person somewhere discovered, oh, if we put angry man yelling as our app icon, more people click on it. They don't care why. No one cares why. It just gets more clicks, so it gets more sales, so let's just do that. And that's what we learned. Void Souls had inherent marketability. Can you always predict inherent marketability? Absolutely not. But it's always one of those things that's obvious in hindsight. When you look at, oh, well, Souls-likes are popping off, way more popular than ever, and we're making one that's a very different perspective, top-down, of which there are very few. And that was interesting enough to fans of the genre that they came to this game in droves. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you do overcome the fact that there is no golden bullet to determining inherent marketability. But the last note here as well, and again, for legal reasons, I can't get super deep into it, but publishers are great for helping you survive financially. Be wary of publisher contracts. There's nothing significantly wrong with ours, and on the whole, I'm glad that we signed with them, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. However, I definitely could have asked more people for more advice on that contract before I signed it. We did have a lawyer read it over. We did have a lawyer like redline it and everything, and that was good from just like a baseline like liability standpoint. But knowing all the ways in which things can go wrong, it's unknown unknowns. Until you've experienced it, you don't know the ways in which things can go wrong during development. But the more indies you talk to, the more like experiences you gather from other people, which again, when it comes to things under NDA, I can't present in a presentation like this, but if you talk to me on Discord, happy to chat. the more you know about what can happen there, the more you know what to say in your contract. Hey, in the event that this really crazy thing happens, what's our game plan, and how do we deal with that? Now we're making a sort of spiritual successor to Void Souls, which we have a booth down in the convention hall if you want to see it, learning on our inherent marketability strategies, which is to say, we're making something that we feel like, and we've tested this at a few cons that we've taken this to already, when we just show images of, when we just show a basic description of, people say, I want to play that. We don't have to convince people to come in and play our game. We put up a banner, and we put up our splash screen, and people just sit down and play it. And that has been kind of our new mode of operation going forward, and maybe I'll be back in 5 years to tell you all how it went. So here we are towards the end of the talk, where I'm just going to kind of rattle off a bunch of advice from my experience here. And again, super subjective. A lot of it could be wrong within a year, because the industry is changing that fast. But a lot of it, I think, does apply at a baseline to anyone starting in their indie journey and want to try to make money off of their indie journey. Marketing, sales, and accounting. Most importantly, someone has got to do it, and someone's got to be doing it throughout development. Let's talk about marketing first. The most important decision that you make about the marketing plan of your game is when you decide what game you're making. Because the game that you're making determines the genre determines who your audience is, and then the size of that audience is what determines your potential profit. If you're making a game that is part of a brand new genre that only affects like a very subculture of a small niche community, let's say you hit everybody in that community, how much money would you make at that price point that you're considering, right? These are the considerations that you have to have if you're trying to make money off your indie game. Again, about marketing, start marketing as early as possible. One of the things, and this is something that I constantly struggle with as well, where I'm a perfectionist, I'm making my game, and people are like, oh cool, someone's your Steam page showing up. I'm like, well, this art's not quite good enough, or like, oh, well, like, you know, I want to adjust like the character design over here, I want to do this, I want to do that. And like, it's never going to be perfect, especially as an artist. You're never going to be fully happy with what you're making. The sooner that you start marketing, the sooner that you have a Steam page, the sooner that you start posting about it and telling people publicly that your game exists, the longer you get to do it for. The more marketing you have, the more chances you're getting at being noticed. I think the general advice has been, like, your Steam page should be live for at least 6 months to a year before you release. You don't want it to be any shorter than that, just because you're not giving people a chance to find what it is that you're making. So start early. And that kind of applies to sales as well, but games are a visual medium. This is something that's just an inherent trait about games that is inescapable. Your game needs to have visual appeal. That is super subjective. What you draw might be visually appealing to you, but might not be visually appealing to a lot of other people. But again, if you're trying to make money, you should be testing this. You should be showing the art that you're working on to people and saying, hey, what do you all think? And if a lot of people will give you kind of lukewarm responses and no one's like, can I buy a print of this right now? You may need to reconsider whether or not your art style that you're going for right now is a appealing one, again, for profitability. Accounting is something that, like, I detest, but someone's got to do it. Do you know your burn rate? Do you know how much money you're spending per month versus how much money you're bringing in per month? Unfortunately, most indies are constantly burning money down until they release a game and then burning money down until they release a game. Knowing your burn rate should be determining your release date, because ideally you don't want to be going into debt for your indie game. This is something that, like, I do on like a monthly basis with my team, where we just sit down and we look at our accounts and we're like, hey folks, there's the date. That's the date where we go broke. As long as we get something out before that date, we're not broke. Maybe we'll be broke after that because maybe the game will bomb, but that's not up to us. At the very least, knowing that is important. It kills me every time I talk to another indie who just is like, yeah, the game will be done when it's done. And I'm like, but what, how much do you have in your savings account? Like, when are you broke? You can't say that. And last but not least, a great way to extend that burn rate is contract work. It's certainly not nearly as fun as making your near and dear, passion project, but I can't tell you the number of times that we as a studio would have had to just close shop if we weren't doing contracts constantly. We're doing porting work. We're doing work for hire stuff. We're just kind of constantly reaching out to people to see, like, hey, we've been working Unity for long enough that, like, if you just chuck us some money, we'll solve your Unity problems for you. And we've gotten enough of that that we get to keep making our passion projects. These passion projects take time. At the fastest we've been able to release a game in the last 6 years is 2 years, and that's a long time to not be making any money at all during which. This is a whole slide about 2 words, fail fast. I think that one of the things that I wish I had done differently in my career so far is that we hadn't spent so much time on TwinCop and on Gardener and on containment. I mean, those, as I mentioned, containment was already 6 months. That's pretty short of a development cycle. Still not fast enough. I think the more I see devs who are just finishing a game and learning from it so they can finish the next game and learn from it, rather than coming out the gate swinging with their magnum opus, the more often I see those types of indies surviving to their 10th and 11th game and creating a sustainable future for themselves in the industry than the latter. It's one of the hallmarks of being in indie game development is that you get to go faster. You're not beholden to, hopefully, you know, hundreds of investors that are constantly breathing down your neck and saying, yeah, but like, is that character marketable enough? But yeah, do we need to change this like whole game mode to be this thing? You shouldn't have like 3 creative directors constantly fighting over the direction of your indie game. So you should be able to move pretty fast while you're developing your game. And fast means that when you do, if you do fail, it's not so expensive. AAA is where we're seeing currently a problem of these things are so slow moving and so expensive that if and when they do fail, that failure is super expensive. That's when you get layoffs. That's when you get a whole industry shakeup because they've spent so much time and energy developing something that, as I mentioned before, inherent marketability, you can't guess it. You can't know for sure that your thing is going to fail. One of the great ways to fail fast, by the way, join VGDev, the game development club here at Georgia Tech, or the equivalent at your college. I know Panther Dev at GSU, and I'm not sure what SCAD's one is, but I know every college has at least some type of community on their campus that is making games, and make sure that you are at the slowest making a game a semester. This is the time to screw up. This is the time where you have the biggest safety net that you'll ever have in your life to make your weird, crazy art and learn from it. If you aren't able to join one of these clubs or do something like that, do jams. Literally, hio.com/jams. Like, there's just so many game jams you can join going on at all times, and a lot of them are free to join and will let you join from wherever you are, and do as many of them as you can. I talked about only the games that we release commercially, but we as a studio have done roughly 30 game jams in the past 10 years. We're just constantly doing game jams to constantly get better at making games, to constantly refine what we as a creative want to make as games. Slowly scale your timeline and budget. If and when you do have some success with one of your games, it's very tempting to look at the amount of money that you just brought in and be like, oh, we can hire all these people. Oh, we can start doing this. All these dreams we've been having, we can finally do them. Don't either slowly scale up from where you are, or just don't scale up from where you are. Because again, this is a very risky industry. You always want to have a cushion to cushion your potential failures that may come. And I already mentioned it before, but like day jobs, contract work, build up that failure cushion. How are you planning on surviving if your next project doesn't make a ton of money? And kill your darlings. I only talked about the games that we released commercially, and then I briefly mentioned the jams we've done. I haven't even talked about all the games that we started, tried to like put a niche page out about, tried to do some of the stuff I was talking about where we put out an image and we say, hey, what do you guys think? And everyone's just kind of like, yeah, that's all right. And then we just say, all right, we care deeply about this project, but it's got to go. You got to kill your darlings sometimes. If you're here to make money in this industry, you can't say, no, they just don't get it. This is my baby. I gotta like get it out there so that people play this thing I care deeply about. If you're trying to make money and that thing's not gonna sell, that's not gonna help you. And last but not least, ask for help. I'm constantly on my own case about asking for help. I feel like more often than not, I'm just so lost in the sauce of game development that I'm like, oh, it's been 2 months since anyone's seen what I'm working on, and I need to make sure that I'm not gone off the rails. And every now and then, I'll try to do something that I've never done before, and then I'll talk to someone and be like, this thing that I'm doing is so difficult, so hard, and they're just like, oh, have you tried this thing that's super easy and obvious? It's like, well, no, and I should have asked you months ago. One of the great ways to do that is through ATL Game Devs. This is a Discord that I run, and it is a free-to-join Discord, and it's open to students and professionals alike. And I hope it's a very inviting space that anyone can ask whatever they want, and there are no stupid questions. Network at DreamHack or GDC, or GGX, I should add. Make sure that you're talking to your peers. Make sure you're talking to the people that are here in this room right now, because if you are interested in going on this indie development journey, the people in this room are the people who are going to be on their own journeys alongside with you, and you can learn from each other's failures and successes. Speaking of peers, a brief aside, my first GDC, I made the horrible mistake of just chasing down my idols and heroes everywhere. I was just like, oh my gosh, the developer that made that game. Oh my gosh, the composer that made this music. Like, I was just like starry-eyed the entire time chasing down all these people. And I walked away from that GDC actually feeling kind of empty, despite having met all my idols and heroes, because I hadn't made any friends. All these people who have been in this industry for so long and have made all the games that you're so aspiring to make yourself, they already have their friend circles, and like maybe you get into one of them, but like, is that really where you need to be? Or do you want to be having a tight-knit friend circle of people who are at the same journey as you, who are learning from one another in real time? Because even as I stand up here talking to all of you about how to succeed in the indie game industry, I have had a completely different experience, and I'm at a completely different stage in my career and my journey, that some of this advice may not even apply to a lot of you by the time you reach the same stage in development. But the people who will know what to tell you and what they're learning from are the people that are at the same stage of development as you, are the students in your classes and the people that you're doing game jams with. So that networking is not go to the most important person in the room and hand them your business card and hope for the best. It is turn to your friend in class and say, hey, do you want to help me work on this project after class? And let's like get to know each other better that way. And that gives us roughly 12 minutes for any questions. Yeah, so the short answer is I did this 10 years ago, and I don't remember very well. The longer answer is actually you should consider reaching out to help through either GGDA or through other professional networks that have the resources to help you with some of these things. It is highly recommended that you get a lawyer to help you do these things, to help draft your kind of articles of organization and send the letter, like Secretary of State filing and all that stuff. I vaguely remember these terms from when I got a lawyer to do them, and my lawyer was just like, hey, here are some things to sign. And I'm like, when I sign these, my company exists, right? And she was like, yes. I'm like, great, I'm signing, I'm paying you, we're done. I don't want to think about that again, and thankfully I haven't had to. But it does cost some money, whether or not you go with a lawyer, and it does have a lot of overhead following that, where you now need to be keeping track of all your expenses, your accounting, paying taxes on your business, depending on how your business was formed. So I think the better question is to really ask yourself, are you ready for that to now be a part of your life? My general advice, and again, if anyone disregards this and has success, I'll be more than happy. But my general advice is always, don't worry about commercially releasing games if you're still in school. Plenty of people have done so and had success regardless, but even so, the few times where they've had success, it is a stage of life where things are so chaotic, where especially once you graduate college, you have no idea where you're going to go. You have no idea where life's going to take you, that trying to sustain a business through that tumultuous time is a huge challenge and can cause a lot of undue pressure on yourself when you are already stressed about determining the trajectory of your life. But if you do decide to do it anyway, like I said, lawyer is the best bet. If you can find an entertainment lawyer or someone similar who can help draft all these things for you, I would not recommend going it alone. Oh, sorry, I thought that was Anne. Yeah. Are you asking if I'm applying for grants? Is that what you said? Honestly, actually, I've never applied for a grant. That's honestly the short answer. I don't know anything about applying for a grant, and I'm not sure how to advise you to. Yep. Okay. Oh, yes. Mhm. One of the, so the question is, what is one of the most challenging financial struggles we've had? Yeah, I think one of the most challenging financial struggles we've had that is not often talked about is the challenge of just talking about money. When you're starting a team and you're running a business, and honestly, as is often the case in indie game development, you're working with friends, and it is really awkward to be sitting down and talking about, hey, friend who I've known for like most of my life, is it okay if I only pay you this much because I'm about to go broke? You have to just be you have to be able to be transparent when you're working on such tight margins. And I mean, there's been the ongoing constant financial struggle of just, we're not rich, we're constantly financially struggling. That's just a background radiation of my life. But I think the unique challenge that I think no one really addresses is that like you have to be able to be candid about these things. More often than not, I think the cases where people fail to handle themselves financially is when they're so anxious to talk about money with friends and coworkers that they end up either lying or just not being honest with each other about where they are financially, and then someone goes broke or something really terrible happens financially. So the more honest you can be, the better. Finding professional work / internships while you're in college. I'll say like every job that I've ever gotten has been because of the aforementioned peers. Every career opportunity I've ever had has only been because a peer that I'm friends with that trusts me and wants me to succeed helped me in some way. And yes, obviously, like the general advice that most people say, which is shotgun approach, like send out as many applications as you can, still applies. Definitely do that. But it goes back to the importance of networking. I think when you're networking, are you just only going to the most important person in the room and hoping to network with them? They're not the ones who are going to just say, oh yeah, that random person I met at that one con, I'll give them a job. But if one of your friends is lucky enough to land a job somewhere that you want to be as well, and that friend is super excited to have the opportunity to work alongside you, they're the ones who are going to advocate for you within the company to bring you in as well. And so I think that is honestly the best advice I can give. Yeah, so the question is it advisable to, when making small projects, to consider making the small projects a part of a whole, part of something bigger or longer, right? In general, one of the things I didn't mention, by the way, is like with each passing project, every time we wrap up on a project, we spend a little bit of time taking any code that we think is just applicable to games in general, like pausing, settings menus, because you don't want to redevelop those every single time. You should be taking parts of your project as you carry on from one to the next. Don't start entirely from scratch. Take some learnings from the before and apply them to the next. Whether or not it's beneficial to make like a partial project and like make it a part of a bigger whole later, that may come down to personal preference, just depending on how well you're able to reel yourself in creatively. I think sometimes the challenge can be not getting too caught up in what the project is going to be eventually and staying more in the present of here's what the project is, here's where my endpoint is, I need to wrap this up and move on to the next, and wrap that up and move on to the next. But if you're constantly thinking about, oh, this is one day going to be part of this big franchise with all these different things, like I would love to be able to make sequels to my own games, and I would love to make like whole worlds to expand upon every game I've ever made. But in the interest of making sure that we finish the game and stay focused, I try to put all that out of my mind as much as possible while I'm working on the present. And then if it happens, it happens. I think that would be my approach, but I think that does honestly come down a bit to subjective. Yes, the question is, are there blog posts that I would recommend for marketing? It's very on the nose. It's a blog called How to Market a Game by Chris Zukowski. Definitely read that. Chris does a really good job of summarizing a lot of information through a lot of data-driven research, and almost everything I've learned about marketing has been from his blog, and it's a good starting point too. He often, like, if you join his Discord too, you'll find through that way, like, all the other people that are writing good articles. The question is, how do we manage time spent on contract work versus the active main project of the studio, right? Difficultly, it's never easy. It's always a balancing act. The reality is that unless you have a publisher that's bearing down on you with milestones and deadlines, you are setting your own milestones and deadlines on your indie project. So usually the contracts take precedence because they're the ones that we're getting paid for, and they also have their own timelines that we're trying to meet. So I do usually err on the side of spending time on the contracts rather than the indie projects until or if we get a publisher or funding, and now we're beholden to them, and then we have to do a bit more kind of tighter negotiation between the two to figure out which one deserves the right attention at the right time. Yeah, our contract work has spanned a wide variety of things. We've done some educational games. A lot of it is, oh, sorry, I didn't really repeat the question, but hopefully from context you can tell. It's just out talking about what kind of contract work we've done and how do you find it. Educational games, co-development, where we've just helped other indies work on their games, porting is all the contract work, and consulting. These are all the types of contract works that we've done. And getting it is also a lot of networking. Going to GDC specifically has been really beneficial to me to help build those connections, where I'll go to GDC specifically with the intent not to go sit in talks all day, not to go to parties, but to just find other people that are, again, at a similar point in their journey as me, or usually a little bit earlier in their journey, so that I can provide what guidance we have to help make sure no one else makes the same mistakes that we have. So that's a big starting point, is the networking from there. And then from there, again, every opportunity that we've had in contracting has been someone recommending us to someone else because we made a good friend with someone, and they're like, hey, we trust these guys, they're not gonna screw you over, why don't you help that studio as well? Great question, yeah. How do you approach GDC, and do you bring a game, do you not, how do you get there? There's a lot of stuff that goes into how one should approach GDC, especially now that things are constantly changing with GDC, both in price structure and general vibes overall. So I'll try to focus on some advice that I think are a little bit more timeless / apply to not just GDC, but just cons in general. One, especially for students, share an Airbnb. Wherever you go, it's going to be expensive. You're going to have to pay for the flights. You're going to have to pay for the hotel, all that stuff. San Francisco, of course, is especially expensive. So I remember the first 2 GDCs I went to, we shared a, like, 2-queen bed room with, like, 6 people. Just crammed ourselves in there and hoped for the best to make things work financially. That's point number 1. Should you bring a game? If you have a game, bring it. I'd say don't pay for a booth. Don't, like, go out of your way to, like, spend a lot of money on showing your game there. The few times that I've shown games at GDC have either been by getting into showcases where they give us space to show for free, or showing up to places with my laptop. Again, this was before Steam Deck existed, which is now a great way, by the way, if you can get your build loaded onto a Steam Deck to show off your game. But at the time, I would just take my laptop. I remember I went to one party where I wanted to show my game off to some people, and I just, like, there was a trash can that I just, like, put my laptop on top of, and it was like, here's the game, everybody, and everyone crowded around thinking it was a booth because it was on, like, a table-like thing. So show it off wherever you can, but I'd also say don't make that be the focus, because, again, you're trying to make friends here. show it off if it comes up in conversation, but the most annoying thing that you can have happen to you if you've gone to GDC a few times is you're just trying to have a conversation with somebody, and suddenly they switch gears and now they're marketing their game to you, and you're like, well, I just wanted to be friends. Like, we don't have to get into that yet. So that's my advice. One more, or are we out of time? Okay, that's fine. I mean, I'm going to be downstairs at the booth at Mouseword, so if you guys want to talk, come hang out there. And I'm in the ATL Game Dev Discord all the time, very easy to reach, so reach out if you have any questions. Thank you, everyone.